All right, guys, this is our Sergey Aram show is back with episode number two, where we will be talking about staff augmentation. Aram, thanks for coming. And first question I have for you is staff augmentation is quite ambiguous. What is it? Why do we need it?
Yeah, well, it is an ambiguous answer I will give, but I'll try to be as detailed around it. So, in a very kind of basic explanation, staff augmentation is a concept where you take, individuals like a product manager, a developer, a designer, and a company can hire those people and make them part of their team. It's basically they become an embedded team member within their own organization, within their own product process. You're basically, the concept is you're augmenting out their team. And it's beneficial in circumstances when you have a big project you need to get done. You need to bring on extra resources. You look for an agency that has maybe available capacity, and you staff augment out their team members into your own organization so that you could better hit your objectives or your goals for like the sprint or the project.
How does integration work in that way with when the new members are coming into a project, and maybe it's different when a project is early in its development versus it's in midway or close to being done?
Yeah, so some of the things you should look for is like their skill sets. Do they have experience working in your specific product in your industry? If it's somebody on the development side, do they have the tech stack experience that your existing team is already working on? So, like for example, if your team is working primarily in JavaScript and the developer you're considering for staff augmentation only has experience in PHP, not a good fit, right? Because they won't know how to
Yeah.
help. Um, some other things to kind of look out for is like, can they be a good fit for the team, right? Like I know it sounds, a bit crazy, like you're kind of just like renting somebody, via this
Yeah.
augmentation, but ultimately they should be still a good team player. They should be somebody who can adopt well and learn quick on in the company because they're coming in probably fresh, don't know a lot about the company. So you got to think of them being in a very accelerated onboarding process. So ways to help them, land on their feet properly is having a great documentation, having a great process in place in terms of how you onboard, even internal team members to a project. What are things that they should know? What are things that they should not do? All these kind of things. Like in a typical thing, you should consider the same thing for anybody that you bring in under a staff augmentation model.
How do you test for team fit when you're hiring for staff augment? Because it does sound to me, at least, that it's a little bit more less rigid than the normal interview when you hire somebody full time. Like, how do you actually? What's the best way to look for somebody that is not crazy and would collaborate with others well?
Yeah, so obviously you want to get somebody who's going to be complementing your team instead of being a blocker. Obviously, good places to start is like references. Asking people if asking the agency or whoever, can I speak to some of the references on these other projects that they worked on? What were those projects they worked on? Can you show me their portfolio? You should be able to tell like quality of work based off of that, and specifically around what did they exactly do on those projects. Like, did
Yeah.
they do? If it's a designer, did they do the discovery for it? Did they do some of the market reaches, the UX for it? Or did they just do the wireframes? Then if they just did wireframes really well, then maybe that's what I would use them for. Um, Other things are communication. So are they good communicators? Are there language barriers? I'm going to be working with these people. You know, can I understand what they're trying to communicate, and vice versa? Time zone considerations. In situations I know in the past, not with us, but with other people who use staff augmentation, if they're like North American, if
Mhm.
the client's North American and they hire staff augmentation offshore in like India, Pakistan, or that side of the world, communication and time zone differences are a challenge. So, you want to ideally work with somebody in your own time zone, preferably if you're working with them on some specific, very detail-oriented maybe project, just so that you have a lot of time with them at the beginning so that you could explain things to them online, versus just then working, if there's like a big 6 to 10 hour time zone difference, like your ability to overlap is small. I think those are some of the main things I would say.
Why companies come to CrowdLinker, to our company, to do staff augmentation? What are the main use cases that we've been helping them with so far?
Yeah, so the two predominant ones that we do staff augmentation for is for enterprises and for scale-ups. So I'll start with the scale-ups one first because...
and how do you define scale-up? Like what is a scale-up?
Yeah, sure. So Scaleup is a company that I would say has found product market fit and maybe received some funding, like a Series A round of funding, and they have very ambitious goals that they have to hit in the next 6 to 12 months, if not longer. And they're growing quickly, but they still can't like hire quickly enough. Or the other thing is they're hiring, but it's going to still take them time to find internal people for these roles. And, they would work with a partner who already has an experienced team to come in. So that's kind of like the way I would define a scale up. So it's like a company that's got a specific, problem that they've found and just need to move fast. So staff augmentation works well for those because we have a very senior experienced team. We come in, we plug and play, we embed into the organizations. We kind of data dump everything in terms of where they are right now in their product. And then we partake in, all aspects of the product process, from sprints to stand-ups and, everything as if we were an internal team member, so that we could start contributing from like day one. There might be an initial ramp-up period, but, we typically contribute pretty fast. With enterprises, kind of similar use case. So in specific examples, that we've done staff augmentation for in the enterprise, like we actually are the product team for them. And enterprises typically sometimes have more budgets or more burn rate per month. And if it's if there's an innovation project that's coming in, it got funding, instead of maybe hiring internally for that entire role, you don't know the success or failure of that potential project so early on. So with enterprises, we typically come in, we work with a product owner. Product owner is the one who captures all the business requirements, like what are we trying to achieve, and then under a staff aug format in those situations, we basically put a whole team together from like product managers, scrum masters, designers, engineers, and we act as like, the MVP team for those projects. And then if we launch as successful, then two things might happen. One is we get extended runway, we keep working on the project, or they have the justification then to hire a team internally. With like the track record we were able to demonstrate and the validation of the product, and then they take it in-house. And then we upload.
Right. What about the scale-up part for those startups that are pushing past Series A and they are scaling? What roles do we generally can help them with? Designers, engineers, like which ones do we normally they would be asking for? Or is it very much case-by-case basis?
It's mixed. Sometimes it could be like only engineers. Sometimes it could be a product manager and engineers if the design's already done, for example. Most often than not, it is like a product manager, a designer, and maybe two developers who are working on maybe a specific feature or a specific, complementary product to what the internal core team's already working on.
Right. How do we structure the contract for stock augmentation. Is there any specifics that you should pay attention to when those guys are getting on board, or when we get hired as stock augmentation team, or it's pretty standard as to a normal enterprise style type of hire?
So we have two models now. One is just a pure time and materials model. There's an hourly rate. We charge for the time, whatever it is. We kind of invoice every 2 weeks based on the hours logged for that 2-week sprint. The model that we have new that we're working with now is a squad model. So you bring on X amount of people, so from 3 to 9 squad members. And it's not time and materials, it's a fixed cost per month. And the fixed cost per month gives the client and us kind of a surety in terms of, okay, we know the team's allocated. The client knows that there's a fixed cost for the month and that the client can use this team whatever way they want. It's basically like an in-house team. And there's no variability or like potential for unknowns that might come up in terms of like the billing.
Yeah, I think it's probably easier to on a negotiation front as well, because there's always a discussion around the hours. Is this enough, not enough? And also ambiguity on the project where we thought this would be this way, and then, or client said it's going to be this way. We found out that we need 300 plus more hours. Back to negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. And so the squad model typically resolves those things because it's like, there's a fixed cost. The team's working on ensuring the deliverables are always being met. They're full time on the project. There's no concept of like, oh, well, I'm going to need, we need an extra 300 hours because it's not based on hours.
But in terms of the output, how is it different? Is it still, obviously you're still discussing the certain output that's going to be delivered, but it's just a different way of getting there.
Yeah, that's right. Like we're not, we still work in sprints, obviously, in 2-week sprints. But the difference is ultimately in a time and materials model, if we say forecast out a team in a sprint and it's 100 hours, and in that sprint, we ended up doing 200 hours of work, there's a 100-hour variance. So then there could be like some discontent around like that overage of the variance. Whereas in a fixed cost model, there is nothing like that.
Yeah. What about the prices? We speak to clients, they always want to ask, how much does this cost? But luckily, we are talking about staff augmentation, which is a little bit easier to give a price range on versus building a website or building a mobile app, which has a billion of different variables. With regards to staff augmentation, where are we on the market cost price, and how do we do that?
Yeah, good question. So under a time and materials model, we charge at $130 US per hour. If it's under a squad model, it's $15,000 per month per person. So that works out to being approximately $90 an hour. So there's quite a bit of cost savings if you look at it that way. But the benefit is, for us, for example, as like the agency, we have a fully allocated team, right?
It's more predictable.
It's more predictable for us, and we have certainty that they're working on things and that there's enough work for them to do. Squad model is really great for longer term kind of projects, a few months long, whereas time and materials is good for open-ended, shorter term projects.
And for 15,000 a month, that means 40 hours, roughly 38, 35 hours a week?
Yes, approximately,
Right.
35 to 40 hours, yeah.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Okay. Well, there's something else I wanted to ask you around was about, obviously, how do you pick the digital product studio, development studio, if you decide to go, for example, with staff augmentation model, what do you look for? And obviously, people who are looking for that will read all the reviews. They'll probably reach out to their people, to their friends, their colleagues on LinkedIn or their email. They'll get all of that. They'll look at the prices. They'll look at the track record. That is understandable. Is there what else do you think makes a big difference in picking the right studio to go with.
Yeah, so just like the idea of a product studio is when you hire a product studio, or the purpose of one is that they're supposed to have the experience where they could take an idea, pre-validation, pre-revenue, pre-users, go to market, test it out, validate it, do customer development, all that kind of stuff, and then come back with like a plan where it's like, okay, here are our learnings, here's what we found, here's what are things you should consider. Having a very detailed go-to-market plan even as well prepared, as well as like a product requirements document of what we hope to build. And that's honestly, in many ways, that's the hardest part of what we do, because that's like where the strategy part comes in. It's all product strategy and consulting. And that's where product studios are quite different than dev agencies or digital agencies for that matter, because they don't do those type of services. A product studio's objective is to go and see, is there viability, feasibility, and desirability in building out whatever you seek to do or not.
Versus just go and build it.
Versus just going and building it. Yeah, because there's a lot of people who just go and build something and they don't test out anything along the way. They don't do even user testing. And they go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and take something to market, and it's like crickets. And, you have a failed launch. And sometimes you only have one chance to really, launch. So a product studio's objective is really to try to do risk aversion. Diversion. Yeah. So that we mitigate the risk and the cost associated for you to build a product in today's market, so that you have a more successful launch. And we do that through like a multitude of different activities and methodologies that we've created over the last 10 years. Post that point where we know what we're doing and we know how we're doing it, the rest around like the UX, the UI becomes a lot smoother and a lot simpler, because we know what our goal is that we're trying to achieve. And then the development part is more just the delivery, the execution side. So a dev agency or anybody could do that component. So you're answering your question, how do you select a product studio? I'm going to answer it from the point of like indifference, whether it's staff augmentation or not, but like as a product studio definition and explanation that I gave, I think you should look at how they go about thinking through a product creation process. Do they do co-creation? Do they experience doing product-led growth type of products? Because that's where a lot of like the market is really shifting towards product-led growth. Do they do continuous discovery? Do they do dual track agile, where while you're building, you're still doing discovery? Those are some of the things I would look out for. And then obviously like their portfolio, like does it speak for itself? Do they have enough experience in that industry or vertical that your business is in? Do the references check out? Make sure that you are able to speak to the team that you're going to be working with before kickoff and before you sign any contracts. Look at their backgrounds, look at their experiences, look at their strengths, weaknesses. It's always great to be transparent and saying, we even might have weaknesses that we'll present to the client so that they're aware. And then if the client has things that they're also strong and weak at, we want to know what those are so that we could either figure out a way to solve for those gaps if they don't have it internally. So yeah, those are just some of the factors I would look for. But there is an onboarding period with any type of new project and like a honeymoon phase, right?
Yes.
So, you typically get to know pretty quickly whether or not the product studio that you hire is good or not based on how prepped and how ready they are coming into, say, the kickoff meeting, or what are some of the questions they ask even during the sales process. Do they have a good playbook around, how they do each part of the activities through the different phases and stages of the product creation process? Those are just some of the things I would look for.
If somebody answers the phone after a sale, that's usually a good sign.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, these guys, there's a team who's able to pick up what I've just bought. Oh, what about great points, Aram? What about the fact that if you, let's say, do go with a studio, let's say you go with a product studio, is there a way to test them out in a certain way? For example, do some small project or do some kind of a pilot project to see if they would be a good fit in collaborating for longer term.
Yeah, great point. I 100% agree. It's a great way to test the waters is do a pilot project, do a proof of concept together. Even if it's not really relevant, directly to what you want to achieve, try to basically siphon off, something maybe simpler and see how they would approach it, to kind of like get a feel for their methods and the way that they work.
Synergies
and stuff like that before committing to something much larger. Ideally, over time, once you've built like 60 digital products like we have, there should be that vote of confidence, I think, in terms of like the projects we've done, the clients that we worked with, where it's a small network at the end of the day, in our community. People know a lot of the work that we've done, so they're like, okay, yeah, this was good. This became like a gold standard, so to speak, in what it was built for. So I would also look at that as a consideration. But I am a big fan of pilots and proof of concepts as a way to kind of like test out the relationship, because at the end of the day, even for us, to be honest, we're getting in bed or getting into a relationship with somebody potentially for a long time. If it doesn't bode well, early on for us, then it might not be the best experience for us and the team and even for the client. So
it's expensive and probably might not be worth it, because reputation is worth a lot. Like you said, small community, everybody knows each other. If too many projects, quote unquote, if too many projects are not working out, then well, maybe it's not the best way forward.
Exactly.
Aram, well, this was great. Thank you for these things, and thank you guys for listening. This is a second episode of Sergey Aram Show, where we talk about all things product studio, staff augmentation, discovery, and a little bit more about what we do as an agency day to day. And let us know how you like it. We'll be posting it on LinkedIn and all other social media channels, and we will be back with you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Sergey.